Hello, everyone. This is Belinda Carr. Welcome back to the Movers and Breakers podcast, where we dive into the world of construction and explore the stories of people and companies who are shaping the future of our industry. From the latest innovations to the challenges and triumphs of everyday professionals, we bring you the inside scoop of what's happening in construction. Today, I'm speaking with Stephen Biersteker, aka the Carbon Architect. Thanks for joining us, Stephen.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So we connected through LinkedIn because you have some very, very insightful and educational LinkedIn posts that you try to publish on a pretty daily to weekly basis, a very consistent basis. So I was really interested in your background. We connected last week or 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
We both share a very similar professional background in the sense that we went through architecture school, we got our bachelor's, got our master's, and it seems like we both had a little bit of frustration with the industry. We wanted to push the boundaries and see what else was available out there for us to grab. So could you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting you mentioned that, like writing on LinkedIn, and you know that's really helped me kind of develop this story in my head of like what actually is my story. And I kind of started pretty far back, and the kind of about me on my website is like, you know, I almost didn't become an architect because before I even got into the industry, coming out of high school, I really had no idea what the world was like. I grew up in a small town. You know, I thought the house across the street was, you know, designed by an architect, and that was architecture. So when I applied to architecture school, I had interviews, and basically the profs were like, you don't know anything. And I got rejected a few times by a bunch of different schools. And then I ended up taking a year off and kind of discovering what I wanted to do. And I was like, you know, I actually do want to do this. And so I went back again. I got rejected again by a bunch of schools, and I got accepted at one. So that's kind of the start to my story, which was like, I like to say, you know, I almost quit before I even got started. And now obviously I found my passion and all that stuff. And it's funny to look back on kind of how that started. So yeah, I mean, I went to
the side of me that's been burned by the architecture industry wants to tell you that was your sign. That was your sign to not get into architecture.
I did not listen to the signs. Absolutely. It's funny. I mean, when you get into school, and I'm sure people listen to this podcast if you're in school right now, or you've been through architecture school, you know that experience of that prof who's taken it on themselves to, you know, beat you down, right? I had those experiences in interviews. And it's just ridiculous stuff like, you know, we have to read the Bible in a week in our program. Can you do that? And I would be like, no, I can't do that. And they'd be like, okay, then you're not good enough. Like, this is weird. This is really weird environment.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So
you applied to different schools in Canada?
That's right. Yeah. Mostly in Ontario. So there's about 4 or 5 architecture schools in Ontario. So that was just for my undergrad. My master's experience was very different from that. You know, and so I did my undergrad and my master's at Ryerson, which is in downtown Toronto, now Toronto Metropolitan University, which is a little bit more of a mouthful.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, like when you're in school, there's all this passion, and I didn't work in an architecture firm before I went to school. So I didn't really know what the industry was like, right? You're passionate, you're working with other people who are passionate. And a lot of the profs that I surrounded myself with, because you find those people, were passionate too. And Ryerson's program at the time, which is still true today, had a lot of technical education. So there's a building science master's in the program as well. So we took a lot of those classes kind of alongside. And one of the projects that was really something influential in my career and my life was we designed an urban building for the Department of Energy zero energy competition. And we would join with the building science program to create this building.
Wow, that's a really good thing, because I don't remember having much or any cross. How do you explain like cross
contamination?
Cross contamination. Yeah, don't get the engineers involved in the architecture school. But it's great that you actually conversed with the people on the other side, because that gave you a little more realistic view about architecture and construction.
Totally. Yeah, and you could take thermal modeling classes or energy modeling classes if you wanted to, because the profs, some of them were teaching your studio classes, which is pretty rare because, as you said, architecture is usually very architecture.
Siloed, yeah.
Yeah, so I had a different experience of that. But that project was like what you're describing, right? It was like, let's push the boundaries, let's be innovative. And you think that's what the industry is going to be like, right? And then you get out there, and there are some firms doing that, but they might be often in another country that you don't want to commute 3 hours to get to them or whatever. So that was a bit of a shocker, right?
Yeah. So you joined a typical standard architecture firm, and it was, like you said, a reality shock, which is similar to my experience, because I went straight from my bachelor's to my master's, joined, my master's was actually a co-op program. So I had 1 semester in university, 1 semester out in co-op. But once I
Right.
graduated, moved to Texas, I started designing and building chain restaurants. Mm.
Yeah, that's something they teach in school,
That
hey?
was the drop. That was
Yeah,
so it was standard elevations, standard details. It was soul sucking, and in a way, it was actually a good thing that I got into that field, designing chain restaurants and it fast food restaurants, because it was like, okay, I need to do something better. I got to figure this
right,
out. Weeknights, weekends, I started learning coding, started learning
okay,
about material, building sciences, everything that I wasn't learning
right,
at my firm.
yes,
I said, I cannot do this when I'm 60. I cannot do
right,
this till I'm 60. Something has to
yes,
change. So it seems like you went through something similar. It seems like you obviously learned about zero carbon products, zero low energy buildings and all that in school. But did you go through a similar experience where weeknights and weekends you said, I want to learn everything I possibly can about carbon, the influence of carbon on architecture and the construction industry?
Yeah, it's interesting. So at that time, not so much. Like I kind of thought it would happen for me. Like I kind of just thought it would evolve and somehow I'd end up designing these buildings, right? Like some client would magically walk through the door and I'd get assigned on the project and I'd be doing this project. Well, so yeah, at the first firm I worked at, it kind of didn't last super long. Because in terms of just the aesthetic and the approach to architecture, I just didn't really align with the firm. I found a firm after that I did really align with some of the goals and the mission and was really doing some interesting design work. But what I realized after 3 or 4 years is that I still cared a lot about the zero carbon energy efficient buildings, but the firm wasn't trying to get those projects. In fact, they were almost doing the opposite of that. It was like, we don't want to talk about that stuff because it's going to affect the aesthetics. Right. So that's kind of when I started that journey of, oh, I guess I have to do this on my own,
It didn't sit
So
well with you that you weren't, the projects you were working on didn't align with your personal beliefs, I guess.
exactly. Yeah. And my previous mentality was very much like, it's probably going to happen to me rather than make it happen for yourself. And I think we're talking about advice for younger people. It's like, if you don't make something happen for yourself, nothing will happen for yourself.
Exactly.
Right. You know that. It's a lot of hard work, but you really are the author of your future, right? Like if you let things happen to you, that's what your life will be like.
I completely agree. Like when it seems like it just falls into good opportunities and uh, good experiences and all that fall into people's laps when you're just on the outside. But when you go through it, you realize that they make it happen. Like you said, they go out there, change themselves, change the way they present themselves to the world. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
Change their personality, learn something new every day, and make it happen. Otherwise, the world's going to pass you by, time's going to fly by,
Yeah.
and you're going to be at the same job, the same
Right.
office, and nothing's
Yeah.
changed.
Exactly. And it's shocking how fast things can change for you if you make that a priority to say, I'm gonna be focused, I'm gonna set goals, but when I'm gonna focus on, actions to make those goals happen. It's amazing. Like I've obviously been a big fan of your work for a long time. I don't know how long you've been actually doing the YouTube stuff. But if
I
I
think
was
2019, that's when I started Dynamo
okay,
scripting. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, if I would have told myself that I'd be talking to you right now, in 2019, I would have been like, wow, I made it, You you don't realize what's
How fast
possible
things.
and
So you
yeah,
so you're saying that when you started this journey about like publishing a newsletter, writing daily LinkedIn posts, little things that seem, I guess, insignificant to others, to you just doing that little things took you to a different level that you didn't expect, and in a very fast pace too.
Absolutely. So the story about LinkedIn kind of started, I mean, I posted a little bit here and there just for fun. I mean, a lot of people kind of do that, write a little thing. I've always enjoyed writing and communicating and meeting people. But I never really understood the value of having a network until I got let go. So beginning of COVID, I got let go unexpectedly. And I kind of, made a few things clicked in my mind at that time. Part of it was like, hey, my values never really aligned with that firm anyways. And now I have a great opportunity to do something different. But also, I don't really have a great network. Now, when I moved school, I also moved provinces. So I moved across Canada to the other side of the country. So I didn't have that same network of people. And I
To
guess you would have
Vancouver,
the
but you're
same
not.
experience, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm in
yeah,
Vancouver now, which is very far and very little kind of contamination between the two cities, to use the contamination idea. But
yeah. So,
anyway, so that's kind of where I started doing
since
more
you had to leave
consistently.
your contacts back, you started realizing the importance of building a digital network through
That's
LinkedIn.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the one thing, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
Oh, it's all good.
consistency, that probably
Yes.
played a huge role in you expanding your network. It's not just posting on LinkedIn or posting a newsletter once every 3 months and then 5 months. It's
Yeah.
your making it a priority and making sure it's out the door at a set time every single week.
Yeah.
That probably pushed
Yeah.
you to the next step.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I over the last couple of years, what I've been learning about life in general, and it's all kind of ties together, is if you look at the people who are doing really interesting things, it really comes down to setting a goal and making consistent action, right? Like you read that in the books, but it's hard to do it, right?
Absolutely.
Because that's where the rubber hits the road. And it's like the people who are acting are the ones. And you see these people who have been doing this since 2019 for yourself, and they think, oh, I've been doing it for 6 months and I've got nothing,
Nothing. Yeah.
right? And it's like, well, guess what? At 6 months, I didn't have anything either, right?
Yeah.
But nobody saw that, nobody cared then. And for us, I guess I look at other people who have been doing it for longer than me, and it's also that kind of, it's not depressing, but you kind of
It's
think, oh,
very
I'm never going
easy
to get
to,
there.
yes, absolutely. It's very easy to think that why is it happening to everyone else? Why is everyone else succeeding
Yes.
and not me? Why isn't
Right.
my network growing? Why aren't my subscriber numbers not growing? But you just have to stick with it. Stick with it. That's what I try to tell people if they ever get on YouTube or get onto this social media platforms. Don't look at the numbers. Don't look at the revenue. It's very, very tempting to get sucked down that hole and
Right.
obsess about that. Focus on what it's bringing you. What are you learning every single day? How is it affecting you personally? Like, are
Yep.
you growing as an individual, both in your personal life and your professional life? Use those as metrics.
Right.
Because otherwise you can get depressed that things are not going fast enough, or you can get frustrated that everyone else is going, like,
Yep.
is succeeding more than you are.
Yeah. I fall in that trap all the time. Like it's so difficult. And I thought, like, I post Monday through Saturday. So I don't post on Sundays. I like to have one day of rest every week, where I don't have to worry about social media. But I post every morning at like 6:15 a.m. and I do it through a scheduled post. So I don't have to be, there typing in, or I don't sit there and type it because it's just not efficient. But one of the things that I've thought about doing is moving that posting time to like middle of the day or end of the day, because of that, like starting my day and right away thinking like, oh, did I get 4 likes in the first minute or
Wow.
whatever, right? Like how that affects your mood for the day and those kind of things is something I never would have anticipated as being a
Yeah.
thing, but it's a constant, you have to
It's a
go back
battle.
to, yeah, it's a battle. It's like, what value am I bringing here to people and myself? That's what matters, not,
The
as you said,
recognition, not
the
the
likes and the
numbers.
comments and the
Yeah.
shares. Like,
Going through this YouTube journey of mine, going through the ups and downs, that's a lesson I'm very, very grateful for, because I've seen the highs and how it can affect you and say, oh my God, next month is just going to be as good as this month.
yes.
Nope. Back down to zero. And
Right.
that lesson's actually a good thing, because I realized that it's so superficial. The likes, the comments, the numbers, those are so superficial.
Right.
That's why I try to focus on the lessons and personal growth more. But
Yes.
we've talked about this at length. Let's dive into the lessons you have learned. What
Yeah.
have you learned through all these amazing newsletters that you publish on your website and send out through emails? And they're mainly carbon based, the
Yeah.
newsletters.
Yeah. So what I've done is like my LinkedIn stuff, I post kind of generally about architecture. And one of the reasons for that is, when I was kind of early in my career or in school, I didn't really have that. I couldn't look to an architect every morning and say like, what are they writing about today? So that's kind of what that piece is for. And then I kind of thought, this carbon niche is something that I want to learn more about, as you said. So that's where the newsletter came in. So the newsletter is focused on carbon and architecture. I just think when you look at climate change, when you look at where the industry's going, this is just going to be so
Yeah.
important over the next 30 years, right? So that's really the focus. I've learned so many things through it. The struggle that I have now is the amount of time it takes to do consistent weekly newsletters. I I don't have as much time for meeting amazing people. I don't have as much time for some of the other things that I valued. So I'm kind of trying to balance that. I mean, I just started in January.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that's gonna change how I post. Like maybe it's every 2 weeks so that I can get a bit more value in there. But I'm just trying to figure out, what's the best scenario for that.
So you've published about 8 newsletters so far. Like you said, you just started in January. Some of them are about upfront carbon emission, I guess carbon dioxide emissions, the shocking truth, the carbon iceberg, the OG of CO2 capture, insulation paradox. And I'd encourage more people to go into your website and subscribe to your newsletter because it's very, very insightful and excellent graphics, by the way. I really
Thank
love
you.
your graphics. But which one do you have a favorite among all of those that you've
Yeah,
published?
it's interesting when you say that because as you look at the metrics, it's like, oh, people loved this one the most, but I love this one the most. That's kind of how it ends up happening. Like, why did this get like
Yes.
100% traffic, right? I think the one that I really like was about carbon lingo. There's a kind of this new world opening up. I joke in that newsletter. I kind of tell a bit of the story. Like when I go with my wife to a new city, we're always joking because I'm like, look at that great facade, like what a great soffit, right? All these the architecture words you have, and she knows them all now because we've been married for 7 years and we just joke about it. But carbon's the same way, and what you end up happening in offices is you'll have maybe one person who's more responsible for that kind of information, and it kind of ostracizes other people in the office because you're using these terms and all this stuff. So that article specifically was a bit of a window, and I plan to do a little bit more of a deeper dive into it, but to say, hey, when you hear this term upfront carbon or whole life carbon, like what does that mean? So that newsletter is a bit of a precursor to that whole topic, because it's
It's like breaking down language barriers in a way.
breaking down language barriers totally, because it's a whole nother lingo that architects will have to learn, because it's really important to understand, where is your carbon coming from in your process? Is it coming from the material extraction? Is it coming from construction? Is it coming from demolition? And when you figure that stuff out, you can start saying, oh, well, then we can start reducing it here because, the fact that it's being driven from Texas to
Yep.
Canada is the reason the carbon is so high on this product. So those are the things, but you can't do that unless you can understand,
Understand.
right, the
Yes,
the lingo and
absolutely.
the wording. So that's kind of the goal with that, and I really had fun with that
And
article.
which one was the most popular one?
There was one I think about the insulation paradox. I think was the most popular one to date. That one just talks about the fact that insulating your building more isn't necessarily better for carbon. So it's a bit of a controversial topic. And I wrote another post about Passive House a few weeks ago, and it got a ton of traffic because it kind of painted a bit of a negative picture on Passive House. And I love some things about Passive House. Like in school, I did a lot of that kind of stuff. But when I got into the industry, especially moving out to Vancouver, which is a more temperate climate, and started actually on projects doing some analysis, I realized it's not always the case that just adding insulation to the building is going to be better for its carbon footprint. In a lot of cases, it's actually worse, depending on the insulation you're using. So that's kind of what that article's about, is like the graphic for it is kind of these two lines. It's like, if we insulate this building at, R30 versus R20, okay, yes, the R20 building is going to use more energy over time, but the R30 building is going to have a higher embodied carbon at the beginning. So where does that line cross? Where does the value come from? And it's kind of an interesting topic.
I actually have a story related to that. So my husband and I, we visited a couple of buildings in Switzerland last year. It was sponsored by Sega, which is a waterproofing and adhesives manufacturer that's based in Switzerland. So one of the buildings we visited had these massive, massive walls with rockwool insulation on the outside. And when I say massive, I mean like 12 inches, 18 inches deep wall.
Wow.
And just solid bats of rockwool on the outside, rockwool on the inside. And I'm a big fan of rockwool insulation. But my gosh, the embodied carbon, embodied energy in that building is amazing. So there's this one guy, Ben Bogey, super smart guy. I've had him on the podcast before. And I was talking to him about the building, and he said, excellent building, super well insulated, and it's going to be a passive building, but you will probably never recover for the lifetime of the building. You will never recover, or like you're talking about the crossing, the equalizer point, that will never be reached in the lifetime of the building.
No.
Because of the amount of energy that went into constructing that, the embodied carbon, embodied energy in the concrete, in the rockwool insulation, and in the triple glazed the windows, all that. There has to be a balance somewhere.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And this brings up maybe as a good precursor to another topic that I knew we wanted to talk about, was this group Zero that I'm a part of. So Zero is an industry group. It started about a year ago, I think. And I'm an ambassador as part of that, which basically just means I'm kind of sharing the word about it. And so what we're doing is, we're a group of construction professionals. We're not all carbon experts. Like, there's a lot of people who are just like, I'm in construction or architecture and I want to see change in the industry. I'm putting my hand up. So basically what we're doing is we're just building membership. We're trying to get up to 1 million members to just push these initiatives. And the focus of it is about reducing embodied carbon. Now, there are some groups doing that, but I think when I really got into personal learning on this topic, that's the kind of thing that was kind of a light bulb moment. It was like, why are we so focused on operational carbon when embodied is also a big issue, right? Especially now that buildings are more higher performing and electricity grids are becoming cleaner. So that's kind of the conversation. It's not switching away from operational, but it's saying, this is also important too. Which is really good.
That's awesome. I haven't looked into the Zero group that much, but it's just an initiative started by architects is it in Canada? Is it global?
No, it's global, but it started in the UK. So the kind of core of it's in the UK, and a lot of the activities happen in the UK. But it's an industry group that's more diverse than architects. So there's a lot of groups like, I forget what their name is actually, Architects for Climate Action or something like that.
Oh, I've seen that.
That are more, they're more focused on architecture, and they have some amazing resources. What Zero is different about is we're not creating anything. We've made a playbook. That's the goal, but it's about bringing other information into it.
Okay.
And that's the big difference is, how many white papers have you seen online about a topic, right? And it's like a PDF, and it's like no one reads it. No one
goes through it. Yes.
No one goes through it, right? So we're trying to tackle it a bit differently.
Synthesize all that information into something digestible and into the playbook. Got it. Okay.
Exactly.
Very interesting.
And then have something more interactive where people can kind of like click and then go and then see people who might be related to that, or projects who might be related to that.
So you talking about people at Carbon Zero not being an expert is an excellent segue into the next part of our conversation. Advice for the younger generation. Because I see a lot of frustration among young individuals in the architecture industry. They're
Right.
no longer putting up with this idea that they have to put in the hours, put in this, stay late, and your work is your personal life. And it's just a torturous profession, and it's very old fashioned. And I'm actually very proud of young architects who are standing up to it.
Right.
Um, I was wondering if you have any advice for the next generation that wants to that wants to change the industry, that wants to push it forward, and and is trying to carve another path, an alternative path for themselves.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. There's I've been fortunate, and I talk about this a little bit when I write on LinkedIn. I never had to work for one of those firms that really, treated interns so poorly, and I never had an unpaid internship. Um, but I've heard so many stories about it, right? And you just feel for those people. And I'm glad the industry is slowly changing, but I think some of the advice that I would give is number one, I think the value of being positive for change is so important. A lot of times I see stuff like, I hate this, or you know, all of these kind of negative. It's like there's a lot of negative reaction. We need more positive reaction to say, this is a better way, right? And I know a lot of that stuff has to come from the top because, right, it's hard for people who are just starting out in their careers to make change. But what I will encourage people to say is to actually look around. A lot of people think, I have to work for that firm
The star architect.
that's, the star architect. And I don't know if they're all the ones
Yeah.
that are the problem, but evaluate the job on more than just the name on the door. Because I can tell you from never working for one of those firms before, you can be a great architect, you can do great design without having to go through all that. And there are architects, I can guarantee you, in your region that will value you. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is about value.
I completely agree with what you said. The only one thing I don't agree with is that we don't have to wait for a top-down change. I think what you have done and what I've seen other people try to do is initiate a bottom-up change.
Sure.
Like I'm not saying this in a critical way, but you coining yourself as a carbon architect, I applaud you for that, because you're not an expert. I'm not an expert. And through my journey, I've realized that nobody is an expert in this field. We're all
Right.
just doing our best, learning something new every day, trying to contribute what we can to the future of our industry. We're doing this ourselves. And I love
Absolutely.
that sort of personal initiative. So the next generation of architects and all that who are frustrated with the industry, don't focus on the negatives. Completely agree with you on that, but try to channel that frustration into something positive. How
Exactly.
can you change the industry in your own personal way and
Yeah.
initiate a bottom to top change?
Yeah. Yeah. That's honestly so important. And, it is really about action. And it doesn't mean like necessarily picketing or something like that. Right. But talk is easy, right? Talk is so easy. It's like, if you really want to make a change, you have to actually do something. And a lot of it comes down to value, to be honest. Like when I started early in my career, I was pretty clear at some of my jobs to say, I am not productive after 5 p.m. So I won't be working after 5 p.m. It was the same thing when I was in school. I didn't pull any all-nighters because after like 3 a.m., I was like, I'm not actually contributing anything. I'd rather get up at 6 and work for half an hour.
Me neither. Never pulled an all-nighter.
Hey, nice. I didn't know we had that in common.
Yep, never pull an all-nighter. So
But
this
you
is not
see,
worth
right?
not sacrificing my health over
Yeah,
this.
it's like you look around and you're like, these people aren't producing anything of real value in like that 4-hour window where you're basically dead. It's
Exactly.
right. It's kind of a similar thing. It's like, I'm more productive if I can do this. So kind of trying to communicate the value, I guess.
So where do you see your personal journey heading? I would encourage you to keep posting your newsletter. I know it's very difficult, and
Yeah.
the family completely matters. Put them first, but if you can, keep posting consistently. Um, but where do you see all this knowledge that you've gained? How do you see it influencing your professional life in the future?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've already seen a big change in my my actual career. I'll say, like, this is just a fun kind of side project. The whole carbon architect thing has nothing to do with my 9 to 5 or whatever. But it, as you said, when you're learning those things, I'm not an expert, but you become more experienced, you become more, and people can rely on you more. So in my job already, I've seen this. I've kind of come into a new role in my firm where I'm pushing the firm sustainability initiatives. Something that we never did before. We never really had a position for that, but it was like, hey, you care about this. We want to be doing this more. We'll push you into that role, right? So I think my goal is to elevate the whole industry. I know that's your goal as well, is to say, like, what can we bring in value as an architect to the firm to help everyone else? And that's kind of where I want this to go personally, but also professionally as well, is to be able to elevate the industry. Because I look at people around me in my office, and they're working really hard on the projects every day, and they care about the environment, or they want to, but they don't know how, and they don't have the resources, and they're like, what, like, help me. And that's kind of the people that I want to help, because I write actually about this in a recent issue of the Carbon Architect, is just how important every one of us is, right? It's like, yes, the client has maybe disproportionate impact,
impact on the project.
but if everyone on the design team is pushing this, I can 100% guarantee you're going to get a better product at the end of the day, right? You're going to get a lower carbon building if everyone on the team is saying, hey, I'm picking paints, I'm picking carpets, right? Like, I'm specifying electrical panels if you're an electrical engineer, right? I'm a contractor. I'm going to try and find some materials that are equivalent to the spec that I can actually get locally. If everyone on the team is kind of doing this together, it's not just one person who's saying, like, this is a sustainable building, right?
Because you cannot really and truly impact the industry as a single individual. But if you disseminate the information that you have learned to everyone else on your team, and
That's
then,
right.
like you said, everyone's pushing towards the same goal because everyone's on that same page, then you can really truly make an impact. And that's
Totally.
excellent advice for people. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge on the podcast, Stephen. And I encourage everyone to sign up for your newsletter. I'm going to post a link to it in the description and also on my LinkedIn post. But I'm excited to see where your career goes. We need to catch up again pretty soon.
Thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And I had a really great conversation, and looking forward to more in the future.
Thanks, Stephen.